space for exploring. Here we go, we are recording. Hello and welcome to Climate Conversations, a space for exploring the big ideas and challenges that define climate literacy in the 21st century. Climate Conversations are chats with some of the leading voices at the intersection of children's and young adult literature and climate activism. The goal is to share actionable insights and invite you to consider how to apply them to questions about climate change in your own life and in helping your children or students navigate their own. These conversations are a feature of Climate Lit, climatelit.org, an online resource for building universal climate literacy with environmental narratives in literature and media. Today, we are very fortunate to have award-winning author of eco-fantasy, Todd Mitchell, joining us to discuss the role of fantasy in confronting the impacts of climate change. Todd will introduce his two most recent middle grade novels, The Namer of Spirits and The Last Panther, which I've marked up quite a bit, and to talk about the challenges and opportunities of engaging young readers to reimagine our relationship with the environment and with each other. We will be recording this conversation and it will be posted on the Climate Lit events page of our website in about a month. As far as introductions, I'm Rebecca Young and I am zooming in from Oneonta, which is located at the foothills of the New York Catskills and what the Iroquois called the place of the open rocks. I serve as a language and literature content specialist for the nonprofit education organization Cognia. I also write about and advocate for delivering comprehensive K-12 climate education through the lens of literature. So I am thrilled to be highlighting Todd's excellent work and to be co-moderating this conversation along with Kirsten Hunt. We look forward to seeing your questions in the chat for our conversation. Kirsten?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Kirsten Hunt. I'm a PhD student here at the University of Minnesota in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction. I'm currently researching possibilities and thought patterns in the area of comprehension and meaning making through readers' response. I'm also really excited to be here today, co-moderating alongside Rebecca and discussing Todd's new books. I am pleased to tell you a little bit more about Todd. Todd Mitchell is the award-winning author of several books and comics for young readers and adults, including The Last Panther, The Traitor King, The Secret to Lying, Backwards, and A Flight of Angels. His two most recent books were just released by Owl Howl Press this fall, one for writers, artists, and other creators, currently titled Breakthrough: How to Overcome Doubt, Fear, and Resistance to Be Your Ultimate Creative Self, and a middle grade novel that's been optioned for film and TV development titled The Namer of Spirits. Yeah. Todd's books have twice won the Colorado Book Award, and his middle grade novel, The Last Panther, won several national awards, including the Green Prize for Sustainable Literature and the Green Earth Honor Book Award. In addition to his books, he's published short stories, essays, and poems in national and international journals. Currently, he serves as the director of the Beginning Creative Writing Teaching Program at Colorado State University. He lives in Fort Collins, Colorado with his wife, dog, and two wise daughters. You can visit to learn more about Todd. He has a website, toddmitchellbooks.com. I think it got thrown in the chat. I'm just, thank you so much for being here, Todd, and I'm going to turn it over to you if you'd like to share more about yourself and maybe give a little brief introduction of The Namer of Spirits and The Last Panther, if you could.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for having me here, and thank you to Climate Lit, which is just an incredible resource. And I hope any educators out there will check it out and see how different books, mine included, can be used to address both climate change, but also other significant environmental and social issues that students are inheriting. So my most recent book is The Namer of Spirits, which just came out this October. And this seems timely. Today is the last day of fall, which always kind of throws me off. I don't expect fall to go into December, but here we are. Shortest day of the year almost. So The Namer of Spirits is the story of Ash. She's a 12-year-old girl who lives, it's in a fictional world. I call it a steampunk eco-fantasy. So steampunk meaning it takes place in a fictional 19th century. She lives in a frontier town that's at the edge of this huge cloud forest. And her village is being attacked by these Ilwyn, which are these angry forest spirits. One is kind of pictured on the cover. And Ash has a special ability to hear the true names of things and to name things with the names that she hears. And that becomes a way of both understanding and sometimes even reshaping what things are. And using her ability, she renames one of these Ilwyn and ends up going on an adventure with it into the forest, also with Fen, who is a indigenous forest boy in this book, to find out why the Ilwyn are attacking her village and what they can do about it. So it's a bit of an adventure. It's a pretty imaginative book. It has all sorts of unusual things in it. One is like these mist cats, which maybe you can see it on the back. That's Fen and a mist cat, and giant trees and villages and trees. And of course, because it's steampunk, it also has an airship and other stuff. So although this book is fantasy, it was actually inspired by real world reporting on rainforest destruction in the Amazon, reporting that Lulu Garcia Navarro did, a whole series of reports that she did with NPR about 5 years ago, that when I heard them, it completely changed my understanding of what drives deforestation, and how complex that issue is. So one of the things I want to do with this book is provide a fictional framework to delve into a real world issue like rainforest destruction, which impacts us all, and is incredibly important globally, without oversimplifying that issue. So a lot of the story comes from the complexity of what is driving that rainforest destruction in there. And there is an author's note at the end that helps readers see some of what inspired the story here. And I want to read two quotes that I have in this author's notes. One is from Ntoni, who's the leader of the Kaseji people, which is an indigenous tribe in the Amazon. And he said, "I don't know if you know this, but trees are like us. They talk like us. This is why I'm very careful about cutting them down. People hurt them a lot. If I cut down a tree, the kin will ask, 'Why did you kill my brother?'" And I think for many audiences in North America that I've spoken with, this kind of shifts their view of trees. We don't often think about trees being like us, talking like us, thinking like us, having kin. And part of what I wanted to get at with this story is with Ash's ability to listen and hear the true names of things, she's noticing things, connections between things that a lot of other people are missing. And she's trying to bring that to the attention of the other villagers there. Another quote here is from Antonio Donato Nobre, who is a climate scientist in Brazil. And he said, "Climate is a judge that knows how to count trees and never forgets and never forgives." And a lot of climate scientists who've studied the Amazon have noticed that not only is the Amazon a rainforest that needs a lot of rain, it actually creates its own weather in what scientists have called a river in the sky. And that fantastic water cycle plays a big part in the Name of Spirits too, as the cloud forest creates its own weather and brings in this river in the sky. But as scientists in our own world have pointed out, if even just 10 or maybe 20% more trees in the Amazon are cut down, then the Amazon forest will no longer be able to pull in that rain to create that river in the sky. And the whole ecosystem could collapse. So now is a very important time for us to care about the forest and to take action to try and protect the rainforest. But the other thing about this book is it does take place in a fictional world, because rainforest destruction is not just one country's problem, and not just something that one nation has done. It's something that many nations, the United States included, have done. And so I wanted to look at what it is that not just in one country, but in many countries throughout history has driven this sort of rainforest destruction and what could be done to change that. Sorry about that long explanation.
Oh, it was great. Thank you. Todd, would you like to just kind of open the discussion up and participants can ask questions? And I know, Rebecca, you have a question that you could probably start us off with.
Sure. Todd, did you want to start? Or?
No, I'm opening up to questions is great. And, we can come back maybe a little later, talk a little bit about the Last Panther if that comes up. And if not, no worries.
Great. Yeah, I love that discussion of trees, and I love the back material that you included in the book to sort of help explain your inspiration and also the science behind the fantasy world that you've created that is so, unfortunately, so based in our reality, right? With the destruction of the trees. And for me, it really echoed Kiri's experience in this sort of the spiritual nature of the trees in The Last Panther, which we can talk about. But I was curious, I know that you've been working with educators, and I was reading both novels from a former teacher's perspective. I taught high school English, and now advocate for using books like yours in the classroom to teach about climate education. And I know that you've been working directly with teachers and with their students. So I thought if you could share some of the educational materials that are available for this novel and perhaps Panther, and also maybe some of your experiences with the teachers and what they've shared with you in terms of their students' experience of reading the novel, because there are so many layers that they could explore through this fantasy world. There's so many extensions into real world research that they could incorporate in not only an English classroom, obviously, but any number of disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
exciting.
Well, and as a teacher myself, and I've taught every grade except kindergarten, and I still work a lot in both elementary, middle, and high schools. I've found that fiction is kind of an ideal way to approach difficult issues, whether they're difficult environmental or social issues, because it creates a safe space with we can discuss things and without all the political rhetoric or baggage, that we can approach it in the world of the fiction and see how it operates there, and then make connections between the fictional world and our own world. And that process of making connections between a book and our reality is actually fundamental to being a good reader. And it's what students often need to learn to do, is how do you create a connection between a text and yourself? And so I think books like this that maybe are fantasy but can be connected with real world issues provide a great model of how you can create that bridge between a book in both the real world and yourself. As far as some activities that teachers have done, one that a teacher sent me recently with this one. So the whole environment where Kiri lives, where Fen and the Daufora, which is an indigenous tribe in the forest, live, where the Ilwan comes from. It's all different parts of interconnected ecosystems. And so one activity that a teacher recently shared with me was having students map out the world of the Name of the Spirits and how the cloud forest connects with the village, where there's also a lot of farming and plantations, and how that connects with the city, and to kind of physically create the web of connections between all these places. And the maps that the teacher shared with me were absolutely beautiful. And this book is really geared at a 9 and up audience, so it's probably best for 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. And I think this was a group of 6th graders that did just outstanding drawings. But then the next step that can be taken with these kind of ecosystem maps in the book was to make them into action maps. So Kiri has noticed that there's a problem with her village, and she's trying to take a series of actions to address it. And so what the teacher had them do was also start think about, well, how do the actions that Kiri takes interconnect? And that can actually be mapped out on the physical map too, which then provides a good way to do story summary, but also provides a great connection to our own world. What are the things you care about? And what is a series of actions that you can take to help address that issue that you care about. And I think it's that last part that's really important, to give students the space to develop their own voices and have agency. And one of the things that I often try and do in my books is that they're about how young people can create change in their community, sometimes pretty significant change, because I don't want to just present young people with, look at these huge, tremendous problems in apocalyptic fiction. I think it's very important to always couple that presentation of what the problem is with a sense of agency and hope, how we can actually work to solve this problem. And as students become more aware of the problems that they're inheriting, it's easy to become overwhelmed. But I think there's much to be hopeful about. And the flip side of recognizing the extent of the problem is also recognizing that we have everything we need to solve these problems, that human caused problems have human solutions, that we're not being attacked by aliens here, although I did write about that in another book. But that we have everything we need right now, for instance, to solve the climate crisis. All that's lacking is our political will to do so. And I think that can change fairly quickly. And in my experience, I've seen that change come from youth, that youth really has the power to change adults. My own children have changed me immensely. My daughter, my eldest daughter, became a vegetarian when she was 4, and got me to become a vegetarian when she was 4. And that's the power that kids can have. And I'm very grateful that she did. I don't miss it, but I think it's neat that like a 4-year-old was able to do that. So don't underestimate the power of youth voices to create change. And they are the ones who have the biggest stakes here too.
Well, and you've fostered those classroom conversations that your novels foster, hopefully do enter the home in those types of ways, right? That that it's less confrontational coming from their child, maybe, to talk about these things and have those sort of dinner conversations and think about ways that as a family we can make change that feel maybe less threatening than confronting it on a larger level. And I love too that as you say, what stood out for me with your novels, and I love them as an adult, so I would just open that reading audience a little broader. But thinking of it from a teacher's perspective, because you've embedded hope in both stories from the very beginning, really, like you've I think provided teachers an opportunity, sort of a rare opportunity, to be honest, in my experience with young adult literature, to talk about really difficult issues that are centered on, but also sort of related to indirectly climate change in a way that is less sensitive or less confrontational than it may otherwise be, by fostering, as you say, action that they can take from the novel into their real lives, and not leave the story with a sense of despair, but a sense of, hey, let's do something. And I think that's a real tool for educators that you've provided, and I'm thankful for that.
Oh, thank you so much for saying so. Yeah, and and the flip side of that, though, is I also try and really present the problem realistically.
Yes.
Maybe I should mention The Last Panther, because this is a book that has some hard things happen in it, but I think ultimately, at least in my reading, has a happy ending. Or it shows how we can find a lot of light in that darkness and create a better future for ourselves. But this one is a story of Kiri. Kiribati is her full name. But Kiri, she lives in a post-climate disaster Florida swamp, kind of an undetermined future, with her biologist dad, who makes his living collecting rare both plants and other organisms that he then sells. And Kiri is really good at capturing things, in part because she understands them very well. And she captures the last known wild Florida panther. So that's the last panther on the cover. And then after she captures this panther, poachers and collectors want it, and she wants to try and find some way to protect it. And to preserve it as part of the wilderness, not just in a zoo. But she recognizes how like a panther separate from its habitat is not the same thing. And some teachers have sent me some really great activities that they've done with this book. All these activities that I'm mentioning, some are available on my website. Others, there's like discussion questions for teachers and stuff at the end. But this activity that I'll tell you about is available on my website under the Last Panther, I think, resources or book club kit or something. But it's a debate activity between these two groups in here, the Fugees or refugees who live on the coast, and characters called Wallers who live in these walled off city states in this post-climate disaster world. And they have different needs and interests. And so the debate activity that this Florida teacher set up was really fantastic way at looking at, as our world changes and we have different groups with different needs and interests and limited resources, how are we going to work that out? And for the record, I wrote this book before the Trump presidency and the whole build the wall became a big part of our national dialogue. But you know, it was, for me, it seemed kind of prescient that a lot of the issues that are being discussed are things that we have seen discussed in much more heated ways in our own culture. And so again, it provides a fictional landscape to have important discussions in a safer, non-confrontational, explorative way. Because the thing is for these big problems that we're facing, whether it's a refugee crisis, whether it's climate change or the interconnections between these things, is we need to engage our full imagination to be able to see the solutions. And I think fiction plays a really important part there in allowing us to imagine what solutions we can enact.
I just have a follow-up question kind of to everything here. And I know we have a question in the chat too.
Yes.
But Todd, I'm wondering, you said that you've taught every grade except kindergarten. So I'm wondering about, you know, the Last Panther and the Name of the Spirits are kind of this, you know, middle grade novel. But like as Rebecca was saying, I also found them very engaging, and I always recommend YA to adults. I'm like, don't be dismayed by the YA title. But do you, this idea of, you know, having imagination and having hope when confronted with these enormous problems and this space that a book set in a different reality, like, gives us the space to be able to work out some problems. Do you, what, you know, like, why that age in particular? Do you focus on middle grade? And do you see any like books that are really helpful for adults that are maybe, you know, written up more for adults? So it's just something I'm wondering about when we think about like middle grade students and why behind that, but then also how much adults need that measure of hope and imagination as well.
Yeah, adults do. It's something that I'd like to see reflected in adult literature more. But I do think one of the things that attracted me to writing both middle grade and young adult is these stories can be just as complex as adult novels. Because as I think anybody who's worked with, especially 5th and 6th graders, like, one of the things that fascinates me about those ages is they have very adult minds, you know, as they're starting to ask big questions and think about the world in ways that are incredibly perceptive and insightful, but that they're often not, I guess, hampered by a lot of the baggage that we might bring to issues. So sometimes they are very clear seeing. But middle grade is where you start getting novels that have real ethical dilemmas and real moral complexity in them. And that fascinates me because I think literature is a great way to work out some of our big ethical and moral problems. And for us, you know, as individuals reading these books, to think about, well, as I confront ethical and moral issues in my own life, where do I stand? So with young adult, especially, and over 50% of the readership for YA books are adults. But there's two central questions in YA literature that almost all young adult books share. And those are the questions of who am I and how do I fit into society? And we can see how young adult books are often centered around these questions, both that identity development and how do I fit to society. But what's interesting to me is these are not questions that we fully resolve in adolescence. All the interesting people I've known in my life are people who've continued to ask themselves those same questions over and over and over again. So I don't really see adolescence as this discrete period that once we get through, oh, I've answered the question, who am I and where I fit in society, now I'm done with that. No, it's we go through adolescence again and again and again in our lives. And I find that young adult books can be really helpful and instructive there. So if I'm to think of, well, what is it that actually differs middle grade and YA from adult books? It is that I think a lot of writers for kids and teens feel an obligation to tell maybe even a more holistic story. We can't just focus on the problems. We have to also look at what is hopeful in this. We have to see that change is possible. And it's especially possible for young people who are in the midst of one of their biggest transformative phases of life and are also coming into their ability to transform society. So I don't think that hopeful message that I often find in middle grade and young adult books is a lie. I think it's actually a more holistic truth about the situation that we're in. And I'll just say, as a person who cares a great deal about the environment, that I went through almost 2 decades of pretty severe eco grief. And seeing places that I love, well, in Colorado, seeing places that I love burn in record-setting fires. I also love the ocean. I love snorkeling and coral reefs. And over the last 10 years, I've seen a lot of the coral reefs that I love die. And these are all impacts of climate change. And it's well documented how our changing climate is both increasing ocean acidity and ocean heat, increasing coral bleaching events, and so forth. But the facts and figures don't tell the full story. They can't convey the emotional connection that a person feels to these places and the changes that are happening. And so I think fiction is very important in giving that wholer story, but also giving the more hopeful story of how we can fix this. It is not too late. We need to act. We need to turn our anxiety into action, but we can fix this. Anyhow, so I went through 2 decades of pretty severe eco grief, but I don't feel that the same anymore. And it's, I think a lot of it has to do with acceptance and what I think of as the green tunnel. And for activists, for people who are feeling a lot of eco grief, I think the first stage of it is seeing the situation clearly, like seeing the full scope of the problem and then accepting that. Because denial is exhausting. Denial eats away at our energy, at our life, at our soul, and our ability to act. So we kind of have to go through this phase of burning away all that denial. But then when you start to come into acceptance, you have to accept the whole picture, all of it. So not just the disaster, but look at all the people who are coming together and working to try and solve these problems. And there's a lot of solace in realizing I can be part of the solution. These are exciting times to be alive. These transitional times in our society, and I can be part of that transformation, part of bringing about the world I want to live in a more sustainable, more just world.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I love that the green tunnel. That's awesome. Well, and I'm going to get to the chat here, but I also love that in getting us to those sort of actionable solutions and hope. You also help young readers understand the many complex perspectives involved in the problems that you layer in your stories, right? That you, I won't give anything away, but when the Fugees find the turtle or the panther, you may have an immediate reaction to it, but through your characterization, you begin to understand sort of the other sides of things, and some of the like human motivations behind the complexity of the problems that we're facing. And so it becomes, sort of bring it back to that safe space, you get to explore the different perspectives and rationales behind our decision making, so that you do get that whole picture and come out of it with less anger, I guess, and more understanding.
That's my hope. I try not to have easy villains. I think when we
Right.
oversimplify the problem and say, all this is going wrong because of this person, that's not just a false story, but that's a distraction from us seeing how maybe we're all culpable for some of the big problems that we're facing, and that we can all be part of the solution. And what's really needed, if we're going to look at root causes and things that are necessary, is we all need to love more. And there was a time when I would have thought, no, that's too cheesy, but that's the essence of it. We need to love more, which means understanding these other perspectives. And it also means loving what is not us. So for instance, if we look at well, why don't some people care about the environment? Why are some people more concerned about short-term profit than they are about the long-term harm that they're creating, or these ecosystems which actually they're dependent on, but they don't see that? Well, it has to do with a failure to love. That they haven't seen their connection, they haven't increased their consciousness, their sphere of influence enough to see how they are connected to things and to care about them. And I think if there's something that literature does, is it helps us be more empathetic. It helps us open up our perspective and ideally to love more. I have this, I have to find this. It's a quote from Iris Murdoch, who's lovely British writer, who said, "Love is the extremely difficult realization that something other than oneself is real. Love is the discovery of reality." And, so we have to realize that other people's concerns are real, and that we have to love the environment. We have to love other creatures. And if we do, it becomes much harder to treat them as if they don't matter.
Right.
Right, we have 2 questions.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Okay, sure. I will read this one first. Okay, this is from Merrick. He writes, at one point in the Namer of Spirits, you show us how the Daophora, sorry if I mispronounced that, use solar cookers, crystal discs heating the pot with the soup. It's on page 148. He's got the page number there. This was very refreshing and unusual in fantasy. We're often told that technology is the problem. Can you talk about how you see the role of technology in the future?
Ooh, neat question, Merrick. And thanks for picking up on that. They're using their solar power there. Well, one of the reasons why I am very optimistic about our future, I'll give 2 reasons. And one is technology, which I know has also and has the potential to create as many problems as it solves. But I do think we are in a situation now where we have to look to technological solutions as we start trying to understand things more systemically. I think a lot of the problems that we've caused with technology have been caused by seeing things through too narrow of a lens. So as we think of the whole system that we're creating, technology is going to be part of that system. I have an electric car and I love it. In fact, I was kind of lucky because after we got an electric car 2 years ago, I thought, wow, anybody who drives an electric car is not going to want to go back to gas. I mean, it's just so much more pleasurable to drive. And for me, just like the relief from guilt, because our house is solar and wind powered, it's 100% solar and wind powered. And I'm a teacher, I don't have like a big salary, but these are also the things that I save up for, because lowering my own footprint and living sustainably is living my values, and that feels good. And by the way, I'm going to make a little diversion here, but I think for environmentalists, what we really have to focus on is delivering a message that shows that caring about the environment is not about lesser, it's about more. Meaning it's not about feeling all this grief and the weight of caring. It's that when you understand your connection to the environment, you enjoy life more.
Right.
That we have to reclaim joy in the movement and show how the reason to be an environmentalist is so that you are living your values, you're aligning yourself with life, you're feeling that energy, and you're part of a movement that's part of a solution that helps you feel good. And so, you know, there's a lot of reasons, for instance, to get an electric car. But one of the best is just, you're going to enjoy it. You know, it's very enjoyable to drive an electric car. And even the speed and the acceleration, the quietness, all this stuff. But I was lucky because when I got one and I was like, wow, this is so much better. Then that helped me see the value of the technology in a much broader sense. I also have an electric bike, and I can go almost anywhere that I used to go with a car on my electric bike, which is also just a lot of fun. So I'm a bit of a gearhead. I am into the technology, and technology plays a big part in the Last Panther too, which I guess technically would be a cli-fi book, you know, some science fiction in there. But the other reason why I'm optimistic about the future is because a lot of the things that are driving our destructive tendencies in our society, our hyper consumerism, for instance, are not very satisfying.
Right.
They don't make us happy. And we know this. We've run this experiment over and over and over again. And as people realize, well, okay, this sort of overconsumptive lifestyle is not making me happy, you know, then they might ask, well, what will? And it's connecting yourself with being. It's aligning yourself with life. It's finding that connection again with nature, which is one of the ways to get beyond your small self and start to feel more connected with what's around you. Like, do that not just because it's good and healthy, but because you'll be happier ultimately as a result. And, you know, I think, gosh, how good would it feel is if we passed real climate legislation so that we as a country knew that we were no longer part of the problem, but that we were heading in the right direction and doing everything we can. We could shed all our denial about climate change. We could look our kids and grandkids in the eye and say, I am doing everything I can to build for you the world that you deserve, to give you the future that you deserve. I'm going to try and make the world you inherit every bit as good as the world I inherited. Because when I was a kid, there was over twice as many animals on this earth as there are now. I'm not that old. But that is how much has changed in my lifetime. When I was a kid in North America, there were 3 times as many birds. You know, so that you would go out and you would hear that bird song so much more. And this is what I mean when I say we need to love more, is to go out, hear the birds, and love them enough to want to take action so that your kids and grandkids and future generations can enjoy the peace and beauty of hearing bird song. So much has changed so quickly, but our, you know, devastation, our destruction, our apocalyptic future, that is not inevitable. You know, we can change things in positive ways just as quickly.
Right. Yeah, that's really powerful, and it sort of leads into, I think, the next question, which I believe is maybe a teacher question about inspiring young adults. So he says, how do you maintain nuance but also specificity in your fiction? Sometimes I feel when trying to educate young readers on environmental care, it can take on a too informative tone, one that they feel preached at, and by the same notion, the story can take on a vague or obvious message, which children may respond numbly to. Children often know they should respect the earth, but are not called to action and have not heard the specifics. So he's asking, how do you navigate this, and what advice might you have for teachers specifically in helping their students take those actions that will make them feel so good?
Yeah.
And make actual change.
Thank you for that excellent question. I'm a big proponent of making cross-curriculum connections between English and sciences and English and social studies. I want to share this George Monbiot quote. He said, "We are creatures of narrative. A string of facts and figures will not displace a persuasive story. The only thing that will replace a story is a story." So we need to always remember how we are creatures of narrative and to lead with the story and then show how maybe the facts and figures fit into that story. And when we give students, say, whether it's in a science class or, other classroom, when we give them a story about, well, when we give them a series of facts and figures, we have to think, what is the story that we're giving them there? And maybe the story is, oh, here's a bunch of information that you need. But the student might think, why do I need this? Present me with a story first about how this relates to me, to my life. And then I will understand the facts and figures. Now, with environmental problems like climate change, what fascinates me is that the stories that we had in place as a society, as a culture, did not prepare us for the situation that we're in. So as a writer, I think it's fascinating to try and come up with what are the new narratives that will help us deal with our reality as it is now. And it's a reality where we have to recognize our interconnectedness, where we can't have the simple, here's the villain, get rid of this guy and everything's better sort of story. We need a story that shows how we all need to work to create the sustainable future that we're dependent on, and that this isn't optional. That the other option is that we just create a whole lot of suffering for ourselves. So all these books have their connections to specific facts and figures, like their connections to species extinction, for instance, in this one, and there's a lot of ecosystem information. This is a great book to pair with units on the water cycle. And
food systems, and food security.
Yeah, but to bring those facts and figures to life and to give them some emotional weight.
Yeah, absolutely.
We only have 15 minutes. I feel like I'm not ready for there to only be 15 minutes left. I have a question about Breakthrough, your book for writers, but I'm not sure if we're ready to go there yet. So
let's go there.
Are we? Okay. In Breakthrough, I have it right here. It looks like this.
Oh,
right? Thanks. How to overcome doubt, fear, resistance, be your ultimate creative self. You write, Todd, on page 94, the greatest creative leaps are rarely intended. Instead, they're discovered. They come in unpredictable realizations and visions. I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on that. And also, I'm curious if during the process of writing The Namer of Spirits, it came out really, they're really the same year, right, for being released. Is this something, this process, is this how Namer of Spirits and maybe even The Last Panther or previous books were developed?
Yeah, and well, so Breakthrough gets into an investigation of what creativity is and what often gets in the way of creativity. And if we think of creativity, just a general definition, it would be bringing something new and somehow useful into existence. And for it to be new means it also needs to be new to you. That our ego minds like to cling to what we know, but to create something, to bring a new idea into existence, to even have that vision of what the new thing might be, whether it's a new story or painting or song, you have to get beyond your ego mind that clings to what you think you know. So the act of creativity, this creative practice, is the practice of transcending your ego mind. And what I found so interesting in this book is that the same practices that monks and sages and mystics and philosophers have been talking about for millennia for how to get beyond your ego mind are the same things that can help us be more creative. A lot of writers, artists, musicians, I know, they have a creative practice, a process of kind of getting into this trance-like state where then something unexpected comes up. You know, for me as a writer, I know that the best lines are the ones that I don't intend, that the character speaks to me. You know, the dialogue kind of appears and I think, wow, I didn't see that coming. That's kind of good. And those are the moments where I've gotten beyond my ego mind, where I've connected with the creative source. And whether we see that source as something in our deep unconscious or collective unconscious, or, you know, completely beyond the human realm. I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting ways that we perceive creativity, going back to the Greeks with the muses, you know, where it's something divine that comes to you. It is always beyond what we already know. And it has to be for it to be new. So it's this process of connecting with something beyond yourself, opening yourself up to it and trying to channel it into existence, and then enacting that vision for others to see. And I'll say with Namer of Spirits, I've really had to spend a lot of time writing myself into that kind of trance-like state, following the character, asking the character, who are you? What would you do? But some pretty, I think, unusual things came up in this book, where it's almost like waking dreams. You know, you're dreaming on the page. And I love the way that those dreams can often speak to us about maybe deep concerns and desires and fears. That fiction is often the play place of society's dreams, and sometimes their nightmares too.
The play place, that's great.
Yeah, I love that. And in Namer, there is moments, I mean, I think towards the end too with Fen, and I won't give anything away, but this discovery of Fen, not in the beginning, but sort of who he really is, felt really like unexpected. And I felt really excited about that, because it didn't feel like it was following like a typical sort of wrap it all up.
Right.
And I just, when you were speaking just now, I'm like, oh, I wonder if that might have been a moment, just because it felt so magical to me.
That was. And, you know, and in this book, the ending was also a very big discovered ending. You know, as I was kind of like wandering around in the dreamscape, wondering like, what could happen? And then when it hit me, the ending, especially for this one, but also with what happens with Ben here, they both hit me really hard. And that's when I think at least in my process, I know, oh, that's a good ending. You know, that if it's surprising to me and if it's emotional for me, it'll probably work for the book. Always when I set out to write a book, I have some sort of outline and idea of what I think the book's about, and I am always wrong. And I love that process, because it would be so boring if like what I wrote was exactly what I thought it would be. Like, what's the point of going on the journey then?
Right.
Well, there's so much in Breakthrough to talk about. That could be a whole, just a whole session in itself, chatting with you about that. But I do want to say thank you for writing it, because as a, you know, as a graduate student, I do find it to be really necessary. A lot of the things that you describe about the ego, getting beyond the ego, and in particular when you write about comparison games and how that has shown up in your career as a writer. And there's just a lot there that feels really necessary for someone in a PhD program, where comparing yourself against others is sort of like the name of the game in some ways. So I just thank you for you know, writing it out in such a clear way.
Oh, and thank you for saying that. I'm so glad it's been useful to you. You know, it was a book that I wrote out of necessity because I needed it, having driven myself to a breakdown. And so I wanted to put on paper a lot of the techniques that I found very helpful for myself, with the hope that they might be of use to others. And I think with a PhD program, that is something that's built around this achievement focus, which can also be very debilitating as we think, if only I do this or get this, then I'll be happy. And then once we achieve whatever the if only is, we're actually the same person with still the same feelings. And we might feel like, oh, I've just spent all this time working for this stuff, and yet I feel the same way.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's about coming back to enjoying the experiences we get to have and how we can do that better. So I'm glad that you found it useful.
Mm-hmm.
I would, so this is a little bit random, but you've made me think, like, I love how you also sort of on that note of like what makes us happy and what our sort of perceptions are of our current reality. In both texts, what was surprising to me is the sort of interrogation of companion animals. And I know that your dog is really important to you. And I wondered in both stories if that was part of your creative process of dealing with, sort of these questions that you may have, as many of us, I think, have about what that means and if that's fair and how we look at that companionship and what it does for us in terms of our own happiness, but what the possible implications are for the non-human animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, isn't it a wonderful thing that we have these cross-species relationships? It just astounds me all the time that like a big part of my family are these other creatures. And that becomes then, I think, a way that we can broaden our sphere of concern. So, we don't want to treat wild animals like pets because they're not, but what we can learn from our pets and our companion animals is the value of other creatures, that, we are not in this existence alone, and the wonder, the awe, the perspective that we can get from wildlife, that is something that also enriches our life. Those are relationships that we can nurture, that I have relationships with the ducks in the pond in this park behind my house because I see them every day and I appreciate them. And that feels like just broadening my world. So, Kirsten, you had asked a question earlier. Oh, well, it was before this began, but it was such a good question. It was about, do you remember it? Are you willing to say it? Do we have time? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Because it connects to this.
Are you talking about this? Let me read it and you tell me if this is the one. I was thinking about Ash and her ability to hear the whispered true names of objects, and thinking about like looking through a post-humanist lens, how Namer equalizes humans with animals, spirits, but what I found most notable was with objects. So like through the characters, your writing instills a sense that these objects hold elemental power and they have a name. And rarely have I read books that work naturally to decenter humans as clearly as Namer does. So I was wondering if you could speak to your relationship with non-humans and more than humans, and how that relationship influences Namer and you.
Yeah, and so part of what's going on with the world building in Namer of Spirits is she's finding traces of spirit energy, not just in people, but in things. And that as she becomes more aware, she's realizing that everything is sacred. And that everything has this spirit as part of it. And part of, I think, what that was about is not just caring about the human, or the human and certain animals that we deem as worthy, but caring about all of it, the ecosystems that we're part of, and the earth that we're part of it, and the universe that we're part of it, the whole. Understanding and appreciating the whole as being necessary for becoming a systems thinker, and then for coming up with systemic solutions, or solutions to problems that exist on a systemic level. And so I wanted that to be part of the magic of the book. And there's a story that I first heard from Ram Dass, not directly, but from one of his books, that I think kind of captures this, like this need to see how everything matters. It was a wise teacher. I want to get this right. I actually had it written down. Let me see if I get it right. Okay, here it is. There once were two students who wanted to learn from a wise teacher. When they approached him, he gave them each a chicken and told them, "Go kill the chicken where no one can see." The first student went behind a fence, killed the chicken, and brought it back to the teacher. The second student walked around for 2 days, then came back with the chicken still alive. "Why didn't you kill the chicken?" asked the teacher. The student replied, "Everywhere I go, the chicken sees." And so I think
That's wonderful.
it's not just, what does the chicken see? What does the mountain see? Where do we draw the line between what is alive and worth protecting and what is not?
Yeah.
That wilderness and the land the wilderness lives on, that all has value. That is all part of this existence and is sacred and deserving of our care, that we are in relationship with that. And when we just focus on the human, and this kind of goes back to feeling less alive, because when we just focus on the human, we sever ourselves artificially from the world that we're connected to and dependent on. And so then we feel less alive. Like the reason to be an environmentalist is to feel your connection and feel more alive, and then align yourself with that life and live your values. Like that will ultimately, like it's so energizing. It's a lovely thing to do. And so as we live life and we have that sense like, oh, I've got more and more and more, why aren't I happier? Why don't I feel more alive? What have you cut yourself off from? To have that small self notion of having more, what did you disconnect yourself from? And how can you reforge that connection, feel it again? Thank you for the question.
Thank you for the answer.
Yeah.
I've got really weird cryptic notes written down. I'm going to have to watch the recording.
I love that you are bringing these messages to the classroom, Todd. I really enjoyed our conversation. I'm sorry that we're out of time because it was really interesting. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for hosting this. And to any teachers out there, I am happy to do free Zoom meetings for schools. I just request that they order 10 or more of my books. That keeps my publisher happy. But especially during COVID times, I really feel students need ways to create personal connections to reading and writing. And it's, my hope as a writer, I can be a credible messenger, just saying, and by the way, I'm dyslexic. I was really terrible at writing in school. So I love working with students who struggle with writing or have started to self-define as they're not great writers, because that was me. So to connect with those students in particular is very important to me. Absolutely. So if any teachers, they can find a way to connect with me on my website.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. I'll give a little plug for Climate Lit here at the end. So of course, thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you again soon. Our next climate conversation is scheduled for January 24th at 10 o'clock Central Time with Professor and author Antonio Lopez. This talk is titled Eco Media Literacy, Teaching About the Environment with Media. You can learn more about the event and register to attend on the climatelit.org events page. We also encourage you to check out the About page to see how else you can get involved with the Climate Literacy Initiative. And for educators, it's an excellent website for resources, I would say.
And we'd love your participation in getting more resources.
Yes.
Great.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, evening, wherever you are.
Thank you.
Bye, Todd. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Take care.